Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is titled Transitioning from the MRV framework, that is the Measurement, Reporting and Verification framework, to the Enhanced Transparency framework. Thank you all for joining us. This is the second and the final webinar of this live online course, Forests and Transparency under the Paris Agreement, which you've all been following over the past couple of weeks. So really well done, everyone, for making it this far. You're on the home stretch. It's great to see you, and we're really excited today to interact with you further. And thank you, everyone who's written some words of hello in the chat as well. That's really nice. So in this webinar today, we are going to be talking about, first of all, the main issues related to the transition from the Measurement, Reporting and Verification framework to the Enhanced Transparency framework. Second of all, the important role that institutional and legal arrangements play in the establishment of a robust, sustainable and transparent national forest monitoring system. And thirdly, we will also have the opportunity to discuss the experience and lessons learned from 3 countries that have been engaging in the new and enhanced processes and requirements established under the Paris Agreement. So just a couple of words about this session. It will be in English with simultaneous translation into Spanish and French. You can switch to Spanish or French using the button that you should see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Si quieren escuchar este webinario en español, en la parte inferior de la ventana de Zoom hay una opción de un canal para seguir el webinario de forma simultánea en español. Si vous voulez écouter ce webinaire en français, en bas de la fenêtre Zoom, il y a une option de canal pour suivre le webinaire simultanément en français. So the symbol looks like a planet. And in today's webinar, we will have 2 presentations followed by a 25-minute panel discussion with climate and forestry experts from Italy, Liberia, and Mexico. And after that, we will have a 15-minute discussion, question and answer session, where we want to hear from you. So in total, the webinar will last for 1 hour and 30 minutes. And just quickly, your microphones are muted to minimize audio problems because we have quite a lot of participants already, almost 150. So that's really great to see. And this session is all about interacting with you. We really want to hear from you. We want to see you writing in the chat, writing in the question and answer box. So the whole reason is to give you the opportunity to ask questions to the experts whose work that you've been learning about over the past couple of weeks during the course. So do take the opportunity and put your questions in the question and answer box to each of our speakers as you listen to their presentations, and as well to our panelists. And if someone has already posed a question that interests you, you can give it a virtual thumbs up in the question and answer box. And importantly, today, my colleagues, Alexandra and Anatoly, will be helping me select the most appropriate questions for our speakers. And in order to make it easier for us to do that, to find and respond to those questions, it would be really great if you could please keep your questions in the question and answer box, and to reserve the chat box, on the other hand, for if you have any technical problems or general comments, or you just want to say hi, as many of you are doing already. And it will also really help us to find the questions. If you, at the start of your question, you address your question to the specific person that you want to address the question to. Finally, the webinar will be recorded. It is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording with you afterwards, so you can watch it again. You might already know me from the course from Module 3, but let me introduce myself again. My name is Emily Donegan, and I work for the National Forest Monitoring Team at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. So now that you know who I am, I'd love to know more about you. So please, as you've been doing, keep writing your introductions in the chat box. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, which is Dirk Nemitz. Dirk is the team lead of the Agriculture, Forestry and Other Land Use Unit of the Transparency Division of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And he has many years' experience in reporting and review of climate relevant data at the subnational, national and international level. So Dirk, please, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Start the presentation here. Okay, thank you all for having me here today and for joining with so many interested participants. It's exciting to speak in front of such a group. And I will be talking about from MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification, to the enhanced transparency framework. Just explaining a bit the modalities, procedures, and guidelines, and the relationship with forests in particular. Okay, now it works. The journey to the ETF, the Enhanced Transparency Framework, I will be touching briefly on the importance of transparency, the evolution from the MRV to the ETF, then timelines, flexibility, new elements in the ETF, what has changed, what is changing, and also touching on very important institutional arrangements that allow parties to participate in the Enhanced Transparency Framework. On transparency itself, one could ask, why are we doing all of this? It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of people involved. There's lots happening with experts in the country, putting all the data together, reporting it to the United Nations, and then experts from other countries coming, reviewing the data. And on one hand, it's national. There's a gain in political acceptance. There's policy planning being informed. We always say that you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So you need these measurements to know whether your policies are working on climate change. It improves the access to support, and it also serves as capacity building for those doing the reporting and awareness raised in the general population, because you can work with actual numbers and can tell actual success stories based on what has been done in the country. Internationally, it's also very important if you take measures that you can show them that your international obligations are met, that you're building trust with other countries that are then following that your ambition is real. And you can also look into how your ambition can be enhanced, looking at other countries' status, for example, and look into how this can inform more effective policies in your country maybe as well. And it helps to prioritize support also. So there's a lot of benefits involved in transparency that you don't immediately think about when looking into this. Now, the basics for the Paris Agreement, it's a global treaty and a global agreement on how to deal with climate change. And the question is how to do it. And there are now different steps that were acceptable and agreed by all parties. The first one is to communicate nationally determined contributions. So the country says, okay, based on my history, I can achieve a certain amount of emission reductions in a certain time frame. This is up to the country to decide and then communicate to the UNFCCC. Based on that, every 2 years, there's a biennial transparency report to track progress, to showcase how the goal that was set, how much of the goal was achieved. Is the country on track in achieving this goal, and what is happening? This submission of the country is reviewed by an international expert team. The review is coordinated by the UNFCCC Secretariat, by us, but is actually undertaken by experts from other countries. So it's a peer-to-peer review. All of this serves as an input to the global stocktake, where countries come together again in the UNFCCC process, in the UN climate change process, and discuss where should they be to keep emissions or to keep global temperature warming below 1.5 degrees, and where are they now based on the reporting that has happened. And from there, it goes back to step one. This should help countries to inform how they can improve the nationally determined contributions. All of this sounds very complicated, but it's building on existing arrangements. So many existing arrangements under the convention are superseded, but not all of them. National communications for all parties and annual GHG inventories for developed country parties continue to be submitted. And also for countries that are participating in REDD+, more important for, or also important for this webinar, they will continue to have a separate technical assessment of their reference levels, but they will then report the results of REDD+ no longer in the biennial update report, but in the biennial transparency report. And you can also see this here in the graphic. There is the biotransparent, or the old reports on the BOR and the BR are turning into the biennial transparency report, so they get the same name for developed and developing countries, different from before. And they are undergoing then technical expert review, which will then also be the same process for all countries. Before, the reviews were different. It was a technical analysis with a slightly different mandate for developing countries and a review for developed countries. And when we come to the timeline, we are it is mandated to start in 2024, which is not so far away, considering that many things have to happen before, including the data collection in the countries. And here's a small illustration on how things are going. And you see at the bottom, you can take it from below, that the national communication and the annual GHG inventories, they will continue for developed countries in the green and developing countries in the blue. The former biennial update reports and the former biennial reports will discontinue at different stages in 2024 and 2026, and will be replaced by the BTRs, which are supposed to start in 2024. This is kind of a simplified version, which is by the book. We expect that there could be countries, as we've seen in the Paris Agreement as well, and in the ratification and the NDCs, that could potentially submit the BTR earlier. Or depending on the capacity of countries, it could also happen that some countries will not be able to submit their first BTR by the deadline given or agreed. There is, and the reason for that is there's a flexibility component with the idea to continuously improve over time. So countries, it is acknowledged also in the negotiations that countries have very different starting points now. Many of the developed country parties, especially those participating under the Kyoto Protocol, they have a vast experience over the past 20 years on building the institutions and actually undertaking the reporting. There's far less of that experience in developing country parties, and there's a whole range of where countries stand and whether they were able to report biannually over the past, I think, 8 years or not. And there's the Article 13.2 that says, shall provide flexibility to those developing country parties that need it in light of their capacities, which is self-determined, so parties indicates when they want to use it. There's specific flexibilities that are available, and the use of flexibility is not subject to review. So it's really up on the decision of the country. The important point here is to see that it's a progress over time. So once flexibility is not used, then it should not be introduced later. We are assuming that capacity to report will grow over time, and there should not be a step back to all this, to previous abilities, so that in the end, ideally, at some point, parties would operate under the same standards. They're already operating under the same guidance, but with different starting points, and over time, this should lead to parties using very similar reporting. What is new is often a question we get, and that depends really on any given country and depends on where their starting point is as of today. For many developing country parties, the frequency of reporting is new, and that they have to try to submit every 2 years. Reporting of institutional arrangements we have found in the past is important, and is something that was added. For the GHG inventories, there are more specific rules on which IPCC guidance should be used, which gases can be and should be reported, the latest reporting year, how far it can be in the past, and the time series of reported data, as well as guidance on using projections. What is new for all countries, definitely, is tracking progress towards the NDCs, because NDCs didn't exist before the Paris Agreement. So countries that have economy-wide targets in the NDCs, they will likely be able to do this with their GHG inventories and really see how close are they getting to the emission reduction targets. Countries that have other targets in their NDCs, they will have to be very clear in and transparency in how they are tracking progress towards these targets. And there's also reporting on the other side, on finance, technology transfer, and development and capacity building that is needed and received for developing countries. We have seen in the past that there's a few selected success factors from country experience. One is to communicate development benefits of information collection. So it must be clear for the country, what else is the data good for? How can it help us, for example, in our planning, in informing policies, and also beyond climate change. It can also be used in the case of forests for biodiversity planning and land use planning in general. But also when you look into the transport sector or energy sector, this data can really inform what should be done and what policies can help the country also for development, not only for reaching Paris Agreement goals. The establishment of a GHG management system and documentation of steps is very important so that there's a continuity in having access to the data and being able to report it. Creating some formal arrangements under which the institution can operate, which also then requires coordination among key ministries. This, given that this is economy-wide in the end, it's not only the forestry ministry or the energy ministry or anyone can do it alone, but ministries really have to work together to get the data and report on it on a regular basis. And of course, engage more national experts in data generation and management. It's very important to build national capacities and have universities, research institutions, or government institutions in the country being actively engaged and building their capacity to generate the data. Given the topic of our course, I thought it's good to also touch base on where is the ETF and the Paris Agreement very specific on forests. And one is in Article 5 of the Paris Agreement, where with 5.1, which basically gives a reference to global forests and their role in mitigating climate change, with reference to Article 4.1d of the Convention. So it's all ecosystems, but forests are specifically mentioned in Article 5.1. And 5.2 has a number of references to concepts from the existing Warsaw Framework for REDD+, and encouraging parties to continue implementation of REDD+, because it's very important, not only for climate change, but for many aspects, environmental aspects, and also development and humanity aspects, to keep forests intact as much as possible. The implications, I think it sends strong political signal on the importance of ecosystems, in particular forests, in implementing the Paris Agreement. Without addressing land use, it will be very difficult to keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. It reassures parties and other stakeholders that the implementation of existing climate change mitigation approaches in the forest sector, and in particular REDD+, is encouraged and recognized by the Paris Agreement. And overall, it has limited operational implications for the ongoing activities, but it reinforces their implementation. There are also forest-specific considerations in Article 4.1, which calls for achieving a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases, where under our current technology, the actually only real removal opportunity that exists at scale is trees. There are a lot of things under development, and there is a lot of expectation that maybe in the next 10 or 20 years, we could have other removal technologies. But currently, the only efficient technology that can remove carbon from the atmosphere and capture it is trees and forests. And to some degree, also other ecosystem components, like, of course, soils that can also capture carbon. But it's really at that level where we have to make an effort so that this balance is possible. There's also a regulation on NDCs, where some forest-related aspects are included. So In the information to facilitate the clarity, transparency, and understanding of NDCs, countries should be clear and transparent in the approach they are using to address emissions and subsequent removals from natural disturbances on managed lands. The approach used to account for emissions and removals from harvested wood products, and the approach used to address the effects of age-class structure in forests. So it's very recognized that there are a lot of national circumstances and ecosystem-specific circumstances that are affecting how carbon in forests is measured and reported. But the important part here is that the country is transparent in communicating what were the decisions and what are the approaches and assumptions in choosing these. Final part on forests is, of course, RED+. The Warsaw Framework for RED+ continues. So the reporting and technical assessment of forest reference emission levels and forest reference levels, as well as the reporting of results and technical analysis of results. Also the reporting of national strategies or action plans and reporting of information on how safeguards, the Cancun safeguards, are being addressed and respected. Noting that the latter two are not actually reviewed, but I think the reporting also helps a lot in the transparency. There are also some provisions in Decision 1 CP21, the adoption of the Paris Agreement, where parties recognize the importance of adequate and predictable financial resources, including the results-based payments for RED+. And you see here the longer version of RED+, of the acronym RED+, as it appears in our texts. And parties are encouraged the coordination of support from all kinds of sources, public and private, bilateral, multilateral, such as the Green Climate Fund, which is explicitly mentioned, and alternative sources in accordance with relevant decisions by the COP. So it's a strong encouragement to really use the existing Warsaw Framework to deal with the problem of deforestation and resulting emissions. We take a step into also the importance of institutional arrangements. Reporting on institutional arrangements is a key part of ETF, of the Enhanced Transparency Framework. A robust, sustainable system allows the country to meet requirements under the Paris Agreement and effectively mitigate and adapt to climate change consistent with national goals. But all of this requires an institution of some sort that has the responsibility in the country, the capacity, and the continuity, and knows how the data is created and what to do with this data. How can it inform action? The MRV systems are evolving. A lot of capacity building is underway, and parties are at different starting points. And also, of course, there are different levels of complexity. In many countries, the energy sector is much easier to measure and report than the forest sector, probably even in all countries. The whole idea of institutional arrangements should be country-driven and, of course, maybe informed by experience in other countries. And that's one of the key incentives why people want to be UNFCCC reviewers. It's not something that is highly paid, but it gives you insights and discussions with other countries, ideas, and some training on how you could improve in your own country. And of course, the best preparation for the future is taking action today. There's a whole lot of resources that the CGE, the consultative group of experts, a body under the UNFCCC, has created. And I think the presentation will be made available later. So with the QR code, you should be able to find the publications easily. I'd also mention that there will be an increase in the needs for technical expert reviewers. And we have listed here a few reasons why it's a good idea to become an expert reviewer under the UNFCCC and how it actually works in your national system. And I don't think I have time to go into the details, but again, the slides will be published. And that brings me to the end of the presentation, just summarizing a few key messages again. The ETF is the foundation of the Paris Agreement. Without knowing what is actually happening, we don't have the information to do the global stocktake and to discuss on whether we are on track or not. Forests play a key role in all aspects of the agreement, in adaptation as well as in mitigation. There is a requirement for robust institutional arrangements, including a national forest monitoring system. And these are fundamental to achieving the multiple national goals beyond climate change only. And building your own skill set in the country now through training positions, you can contribute to the ETF and also, of course, retain this capacity in the country later. I think this is the key message I would like to get across here, and I will remain in the meeting today for any further questions you may have. And thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Emily. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dirk. I really liked the point you made on a couple of slides ago about the importance of taking action today, and it's reminded me of some conversations I've had with participants on the forum about that issue. And I think your presentation was great because it also was hopefully a good summary for participants after having taken the course about that highlighted the important role that transparency plays in international climate action, and also really made clear the differences between the current MRV system and the enhanced transparency framework. And questions are starting to flood in for you, so in the Q&A box, so be prepared. And before we continue, I'd like to do a quick poll with 4 questions, which should appear on your screens any moment now. Okay, so our first question is there sufficient awareness of the enhanced transparency framework reporting requirements in your country? So you can respond yes, no, or don't know. So participants, if you can just start voting on those questions, that would be great.
I think we're having difficulties marking under the choice.
Oh, okay. Participants, if you're able to respond to the poll, maybe you could just, okay, great. I see someone has written in the chat that they were able to vote. So that's hopefully working. I'll just give a couple more seconds to get everyone to respond, and then we can take a look at the results. Yes, we will have 3 more questions after this one. Maybe we can close this first question, take a look at the results, and move to the second one. Okay, so the results should be on your screens. So actually, the majority, 53% of those who responded thought that there is not sufficient awareness of the enhanced transparency reporting requirements in their countries. That's very interesting. 26% thought that there was, and 21% did not know. So thanks for engaging there. Maybe we can move to the next question. Second question is climate change reporting transparent and reliable? So are the reporting activities on climate change in your country conducted so far, do you think that they have been adequately transparent, open, and reliable? So again, it's simple yes, no, or don't know. And again, I will give a couple of, maybe a minute to respond to this to get some more responses. Okay, maybe that's enough time. We can close that one, look at the results. Okay. So to the question on whether climate change reporting is sufficiently transparent and reliable, we have quite an even split between being yes and no in among those who responded. So, and then we also have 15% who said don't know. So there's obviously some work to be done, I would say, based on these first two questions. Then maybe we move to the third question, which should appear any second. Could we have the third question, please? Sorry, I don't see it on my screen. Okay, yeah, I don't see the question either, and I see participants are saying the same. Could we move to the fourth question then, if that third one isn't working? Otherwise, we move on from the poll. Okay, I think those last two questions, we will not be able to see them, but I think the first two were interesting enough that clearly indicated that while we do still have some time before 2024, there is still a large gap between being prepared for the enhanced transparency framework at this moment in time. So fantastic, thank you everyone who engaged in that poll. It was really interesting. And our next up, we have a presentation from Francesca Felicani-Robles. Francesca is an FAO forestry officer specializing in legal matters relating to forest monitoring and REDD+. Francesca, over to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much, Emily, first of all, for your introduction. I'm actually very glad to be here today and to have the opportunity to present some highlights of a publication which was actually launched this year, titled Institutionalization of Forest Data, Establishing Legal Frameworks for Sustainable Forest Monitoring in REDD+ countries. But actually, before looking at its contents, I would like very much to recall that actually this paper is actually the results of a long process that started in early 2016, when FAO was actually asked by forestry countries, mainly from Latin America at that time, to provide legal assistance in order to boost the sustainability of the national forest monitoring systems and transparency in generating forest data. So strengthening the institutional arrangements and having more clarities on the roles and responsibilities of the entities that are part of the national forest monitoring system was considered to be part of the solution. And so the paper, the lessons that are contained in this paper, and actually the country experiences are very much the result of those efforts. So today we will actually look at four main points related to its contents. First of all, I wanted just to highlight that the three versions of the paper, of the publication, are now available. So we have the English version, and thanks to the collaboration between the UNRED program and CBIT Forestry, you are now also allowed to access to the French and Spanish versions of the paper. So today we will look at some aspects, as I was saying. First of all, we'll try to understand better why legal and institutional arrangements are needed in order to boost the sustainability of national forest monitoring systems. We'll then describe what are the main steps that have been adopted and are followed in order to develop a legal instrument aiming to establish a national forest management system. We will then also present what are those types of legal instruments that are in place, and finally present some case studies and actually successful cases that are included in the paper. So first of all, as I was saying, the paper itself provides actually the basis for understanding better the importance of institutionalizing a national forest monitoring system, particularly from a legal perspective. And actually the relevance of institutional and legal settings in order to establish sustainable national forest monitoring systems is very much reflected in the guiding principles of the voluntary guidelines on national forest monitoring, which have been adopted by FAO in 2017. So those guidelines actually underline the relevance of the institutionalization of a national forest monitoring system by formally assigning, through legal instruments, clear mandates and responsibilities to the entities that are involved in the national forest monitoring system, and are involved also in the collection, management, and analysis of forest data. Overall, we can say that if a national forest monitoring system is institutionalized, it will increase country ownership, which, as we know, is key to provide more sustainability, and also to provide a more comprehensive use and access of the forest data. Therefore, permanent institutions with clear mandates will facilitate the task to ensure sustainability of a national forest monitoring system and to adequately inform decision-making processes, including decision-making processes related with the overall objective to reduce deforestation, and in order also to have clear information in order to access and properly use REDD+ results-based payments. So in general terms, we can say that a robust national forest monitoring system can help to ensure that a national forest monitoring system is considered as a government responsibility so that there is ownership. That data and information are consistently collected, managed, and analyzed, and made permanently available over time. It is also fundamental in order to ensure that national expertise is retained, which, as we know, is considered as a precondition for further developments and improvements of the system itself. And also, as Mr. Dirk said, in order to ensure coordination among all the relevant institutions that are involved and are part of the system itself. However, accessing forest data, as we know, does not lack its challenges. So lack of trust, unclear legal frameworks, cost-related concerns, and ambiguous institutional mandates are actually considered as main challenges related with data accessibility. And while informal solutions can sometimes be part of the solution in the immediately, they're not considered as reliable and sustainable in the long term. So actually, in response to those challenges, we do consider that the adoption of legal arrangements can offer part of the solution in order to guarantee, as we were saying, national ownership, financial support, and also interoperability between the NFMS and other systems. So here I will very briefly also describe the steps that were actually adopted and were followed in order to develop NFMS legal instruments. So in FAO, we have a very stepwise approach that is actually being used by the Development Service and the Forestry Division in accompanying our governments in developing legislation. Overall, we do all the time start with a legal gap analysis, in this case of the forest legal framework, focusing specifically on NFMS aspects. We will then develop, based on also on relevant and meaningful meetings and also based on the involvement of key stakeholders, we will define a set of recommendations in order to be validated by the government. So those set of recommendations will highlight the weaknesses and also the main constraints that do exist within the legal framework. And if needed, we can also provide a contribution in terms of drafting appropriate instruments. Overall, we do consider that involving legal experts since the very early phases of establishing a national forest monitoring system could help to address relevant aspects, and also can also help to identify appropriate legal solutions, which should be tailored to each specific country. Within the paper, you will also find a checklist tool. Actually, this checklist tool has been developed in order to assist countries in identifying what are the main relevant elements that we do consider should be reflected in a legal instrument aiming to regulate an NFMS. So this checklist may facilitate the assessment of the inclusion in the legal text itself during the drafting process, and help to clarify if further consultations are actually needed to that end. So as we know, there are different types of instruments that can be actually adopted in order to regulate such aspects. First of all, we do consider that the political will is fundamental. It's very difficult to promote any kind of legal reforms if there is not such political will. Then in terms of instruments, as we do know, we may consider, for example, adding a corresponding paragraph to the forestry law. In that case, any amendment to any national law will need to be actually passed by the legislative body, meaning the parliament, the Congress. The country may also consider to adopt a secondary legislation. For example, we could consider decrees, resolutions, regulations, and to regulate a national law. And in such case, the process would probably be more expedited. We can also consider drafting agreements among contracting parties in order to regulate certain aspects, such as data sharing agreements between relevant entities that are part of an NFMS. And very finally, you can see here some of the case studies or successful stories that are contained in the paper itself. So we have Colombia, Honduras, and Ecuador. We have a very full description of those cases. But while this publication has been launched, in the meantime, we have been moving forward, and we have provided further support to other countries in the region, even to incorporate community forestry monitoring systems into the national platform. I think that's a very relevant piece of information that countries are looking at. And then we have also country cases from Asia Pacific and Africa that are included in the paper. I think, Emily, I will stop here, but I will be glad to answer to further questions during the meeting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Francesca, for highlighting the important role of institutional and legal arrangements for forest monitoring and transparency. It was related as well to what was said in Dirk's presentation about the importance of institutional arrangements. And I would just like as well to remind participants to keep your questions coming. I see a lot of you have already started putting questions in the question and answer box. That's great. So start typing questions you may have for Dirk, Francesca, or for any of our speakers in the question and answer box. Now it is time for our panel discussion. And in this session, we are going to hear from climate and forestry experts from Italy, Liberia, and Mexico, who are going to share their experiences on the actions that have been taken by their countries to improve the reporting practices over time. All three countries are, of course, parties to the Paris Agreement and have experience under MRV that they're going to share. Liberia and Mexico, in addition, are also both engaging in REDD+, having submitted, for example, reference levels. So it will be interesting to hear about the diverse experience of the three countries and how forest monitoring contributes to their reporting processes. Thank you three for being here with us today. Just to say that the session will last for 25 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity at the end for questions. So again, pop your questions into the question and answer box. I think I will start off with a question to Mexico, if that's okay. We have with us today Armando Elanes de la Rosa from Mexico, from CONAFOR, the Commission for Forestry of Mexico. Armando, Mexico has a well-developed national forest monitoring system and submitted its second REDD+ forest reference emission level last year to the UNFCCC. And Mexico's forest reference emission levels are derived from its national forest monitoring system, with the national forest monitoring system as an important means of increasing transparency in the forest sector, of course. So my question then to you is, what then is the role of institutional arrangements in Mexico in terms of forest monitoring and transparency?
Thank you, Emily. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from Mexico. As Emily said, I am Armando Lanis. I work for the National Forestry Commission in Mexico, and we are responsible for reporting on forestry sector, not only about the key elements of the forest in Mexico, but also with the elements related to emissions on the forestry sector. So in regard of institutional arrangements, I see that this is a very important thing that we address in Mexico, based on a strong legal framework that we have, and that establishes the basis for interacting with other agencies to implement actions related to reporting on greenhouse gases emissions. And specifically in terms of forest monitoring, it has been very important to have a strong legal framework like the general law on forestry that it supports or establishes the basis for the attributions for the forestry commissions to implement forest monitoring activities. So I would say that this is very important to us to have this legal framework established so we can interact with other agencies. And also we have other laws that are important for this matter that are related with strengthening the interinstitutional arrangements. For example, we have the law on climate change that establishes what are the relations with other agencies, in particular with the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change, which is responsible for reporting under the UNFCCC. So we have to engage with this institution to provide information for the, in this case, for example, for submitting the National Forest Reference Emissions Level, but also to submit other reports like the biennial update report, and in the future we will need to submit all the reports on forestry in coordination with this specific agency. And finally, we have other law that is the national law of on the national information system, and that establishes the basis for coordination with other agencies that are reporting in terms of environment or natural resources. So we have established there a national committee that looks at those kind of commitments on reporting in different aspects, but one of them is related with the reporting to the Paris Agreement and the new UNFCCC. So I would say that institutional arrangements are really key for enhancing transparency in the reporting in terms of the greenhouse gases emissions in the context of the Paris Agreement, but also has been very important to enhance the transparency in the forest monitoring in the case of Mexico. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Armando, on the importance of the National Forest Monitoring System for transparency. Maybe my next question could go to Sa. Our third panelist here today with us is Sa David, who is the National Red Plus Coordinator of Liberia at the Forestry Development Authority. So my question to Sa would be, from 2018 to 2019, Liberia completed its first National Forest Inventory, which marked the first time that there was a nationally driven comprehensive forest resource assessment was carried out in the country. Forest inventories are essential for sustainable forest management. So my question then is, how will the National Forest Inventory contribute to REDD+ and the reporting requirements under the upcoming Enhanced Transparency Framework? Sa, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I want Please bear with me. I'm speaking from the field, so the internet connectivity is not as good as it should be. So I will not want to turn my video on, so that at least I will have the access to communicate with my colleagues. But I want to thank the organizers for the program, for this occasion to present to the rest of the world what we have done. We also want to thank the FAO that helped us in this process. We want to thank the World Bank, the government of Norway, and all other partners. Yes, as you rightly said, Liberia for the first time conducted our national forest inventory in 2018-2019. How will it contribute to REDD+? Of course, there are several ways that this national forest inventory has started contributing not only to REDD+, but to sustainable forest management in Liberia. Because the information, that the data that we have collected is what managers, policymakers, communities, and our partners are beginning to use. But I will speak to 4 specific things that we got out of the inventory. One, as all of us on this call know, REDD+ is an evolving thing in the rest of the world. There are always new things. So one of the first contributions that was made from this process, or that we see as contribution, was capacity building and enhancement. In order to successfully implement REDD+ as a country, you need adequate skills. And as part of this process, we were able to develop adequate skills for our staffs and ourselves and community folks who participated in the National Forest Inventory. As we speak at the moment, we have in country 50 skilled officers who were trained and are ready to be deployed anytime in the field to conduct inventory in whatsoever way and also collect data from the field. That's the first major contribution. So it built the capacity, it enhanced existing capacity. The second thing that it did for us is the construction and submission of our National Forest Reference Emissions level to the UNFCCC. With the level of data that was collected, Liberia can successfully report that with the report that was submitted to the UNFCCC, it was mostly in-country data that was collected from the process. So we can now say Liberia has submitted her first FRAIL to the UNFCCC as a result of the National Forest Inventory that was conducted in 2018 and 19. We can also speak to the fact that Liberia for the first time now have a National Forest Inventory, and that report is now shared with the rest of the world. As most of you know, we gained independence somewhere around 1847. From that time up to 2017, 2018, 2019, we had not conducted a National Forest Inventory. So as a result of this inventory, Liberia can now boast to say, look, in fact, with the forest definition that we use, and that forest definition for our audience is 30% tree canopy, at least 5-meter tree height, 1 hectare of forested land is what we see as our forest definition. With that definition, we can speak now and say Liberia have 6.6 million hectares of forest. Prior to that, to the inventory, what people were saying was we have somewhere around 4.5 million hectares. The last point we'd like to speak to is the Warsaw Framework and Resource-Based Payment. As a result of the forest inventory that was collected, Liberia firstly, we received financial support from different partners, including the World Bank, UNDP, UN REDD, the government of Norway, and with that funding, we were able to now present our FRAIL. So on the basis of FRAIL, we have now situated ourselves in a position where at least we can now move towards the result-based payment schemes. So those are basically the 4 elements or 4 points we looked at in terms of the contribution that has been made from our National Forest Inventory. But we can speak to more after this.
Thanks a lot, Sa. And I've just shared in the chat as well the report from the National Forest Inventory of Liberia, so participants can take a look. Thank you so much as well. Maybe my next question would be to Daniela. Daniela Romano is a greenhouse gas expert with Italy's ISPRA, which is the Italian National Institute for Environmental Protection and Research, responsible for reporting Italy's greenhouse gas emissions to the UNFCCC. So Daniela, maybe my question to you then is, what institutional arrangements does Italy have in place for its national forest monitoring system, and perhaps more broadly for reporting to the UNFCCC? Daniela, if you're there. Yeah, I see you.
Yes.
Over to you.
Sorry, I was speaking, so.
Sorry, I
sure.
think you were muted. Maybe I couldn't hear.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, thanks. No, I was just thanking for this invitation, and also to the other participants. Thanks for what they said. In terms of institutional arrangement, in general, Italy has its own and a single entity for the reporting of the Italian greenhouse gas inventory, our institute, so the Institute for Environmental Protection and Research. And ISPRA is the single entity for the compilation of the greenhouse gas inventory for all the sectors. So also for the preparation of the emission and removal estimates for the LULUCF sector. We have this the single entity that has been established for some years now. It was a decree of March 2008, and then it was confirmed in 2013. We are lucky because at our institute we are responsible for all the sectors, but for sure to build upon our emission estimates, we need data collected from other ministries, institutions, or research centers. In terms of data collection and data requirements, we have a statistical system in place in Italy, which requires different institutions and ministries to provide data, and some of these data are also used for the compilation of the Italian greenhouse gas inventory. For instance, just to make an example, some products of this system are national statistical yearbooks, the national energy balance, but also the national forestry inventory. Within this system, the statistical system, there is a setting of deadlines, and these deadlines may be more stringent for some products, less for others, like the national forestry inventory, because we know, as also Sarah has told, that carrying out national forestry inventory is very resource demanding. So we can't expect this data, for instance, coming on biannual basis or even triennial basis. But also in Italy, we were experienced with this challenge of timeline, I mean, of providing data for the forest sector. Specifically for the forest sector, we have also a national registry for carbon sinks. This registry was instituted by a ministerial decree, and the Ministry of the Economical Transition, former Ministry of Environment, is responsible for this registry, but ISPRA and also the former State Forestry Service are involved as technical scientific support for some specific activities. What I can say about this institutional arrangement, and also Armando has said that it is very important to have institutional arrangement, and that is true. But especially in the case of the LULUCF sector, what is important is also to build a network of experts. So a network that could comprise university, research center, institutionals, so that we have not only a legal institutional arrangement, but also an engagement of all the related experts to the problem we want to solve. In this sense, I think we can broaden open also to political consent. So it is a way to work together from the bottom to the top and to reach also the higher level with generally with climate change. Another important thing that was said by Sarah was data collection. So this is true not only for the forestry inventory, but for all the sector of the inventory. But it is also important that we start doing something so that we build upon on what we have at the moment. This was true for us, for Italy. Now we are an Annex 1 party to the convention, to the Kyoto Protocol. So we are now getting used to this kind of reporter. But at the beginning, it was also difficult for us. Another important thing is capacity building. So in terms of project, we are trying to join some project capacity building, just to build the capacity if some developing country ask for support. And what is also important and has already been highlighted before is the maintenance of this capacity. So differently maybe from the previous period, now in terms of transparency and also in terms of monitoring and tracking towards progress, we need that capacity remain, at least some of the capacity in terms of personnel, resources, stay where they are, and we don't have a continuous changeover of person or consultants in the same place. So I think I can stop here for the moment.
Thank you, Daniela. Maybe go back to Armando for another question. Armando, what are the next steps for Mexico in terms of the transition to the enhanced transparency framework, and what are the challenges?
Thank you, Emily. I think that the next steps are to strengthen institutional coordination. I think that though we have this legal framework established in a good relation with other institutions, we need to improve coordination, especially taking into account that we need to report or prepare reports and submit these reports in a timely way. And for that, we need to have a well-established programs to include all this information that we need to have in order to prepare these reports. So far, we have also limited capabilities of people working on this, so we need to strengthen also the number of people and to strengthen the networks of specialists related to this. I agree with Daniela when she said that we need to engage with research institutions and educational institutions to prepare more people and to get information that is needed for producing this kind of reports. So I agree also with this recommendation from Dirk, and that in his presentation he talked about the importance of including more experts into the roster of experts of the UNFCCC, because they in that way they will we can create a more a great number of people that has the knowledge about how to prepare and present the reports. That is something that is really important. So, and another thing that is important is how to secure the financial resources that we need to implement these actions. So far, many countries have the same problem, that is how to finance these teams for preparing and submitting reports, because it's really it's a great demand of people, but also on data collection that has to be implemented to produce these reports, especially in the case of the forestry sector. It's a very complex sector, and we need to collect information from different sources. And of course, the field data is really important for producing good reports. So I think that is something that we need to take a look if we want to improve our capabilities on reporting in the framework of the UNFCCC, and also another international initiatives. So other challenge that we have, I think, is that how to raise awareness about the importance of producing these reports in a timely manner, especially among the decision makers. We need to show them that this information is really important, not only to comply with the commitments of reporting under the UNFCCC, but also is very important for implementing national programs and policies for reducing or mitigating the climate change. And we need to show them that this information is also very important to make decisions on every day, so they can implement these actions in a more efficient way. And in that way, I think that also we will help to secure financial and human resources needed for implementing these actions related with the preparing and reporting and submitting reports to the UNFCCC and other international initiatives. And finally, I would like to say that increasing international cooperation, not only in terms of financial cooperation, but in terms of sharing experiences and knowledge among countries, is also very important to improve the capabilities of our countries. We have the experience in the case of Mexico that international cooperation, that South-South cooperation, has been very helpful to increase our capabilities. We have been working with countries in Latin America, but also in Africa and Asia, and sharing experiences and knowledge about how to improve reporting processes, and also how to improve, for example, the analytical process for developing national forest reference emissions level, or REDD+ annexes, and that kind of report. So I would say that international cooperation and South-South cooperation specifically is very important, and that's why I think that courses like this one are very important to increase our capabilities. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Armando. I'm just a little bit aware of time, so maybe I wrap up the panel discussion there, if I may. I'd like to say a big thank you to Armando Sa and to Daniela for helping us gain a clearer picture of the many work streams that contribute to national reporting and transparency and the work around the national forest monitoring systems as well in your country. So thank you very much. And thanks also to the participants for engaging in the poll and in the question and answer box, because now it's time for our question and answer session. So if you haven't already, please don't hesitate to write your questions in the question and answer box, and we will do our best to get round to them. Again, just a reminder, if you write the name of who you want to address the question to, that would be great at the start of your question. There's quite a few questions for Dirk in the Q&A box. So maybe my first question will be to you, Dirk. Some of the questions are about the challenges in the transition. So many developing countries are still struggling to implement the pre-Paris Agreement transparency requirements, and for those countries implementing then the enhanced reporting requirements of the Paris Agreement will perhaps represent a challenge. What would be your key message that you'd like to send to those countries working to meet the reporting requirements of the Paris Agreement?
Okay, I would say there are three key messages really. One is that the start date is now. The earlier you start, the more time you have to prepare and to deal with things. So it's not worthwhile to delay this for another year or two. It's best to start as early as possible. The second would be to experiment and to build on what you already have and look into how can the processes be improved for the current reporting, and how can things be combined maybe with other reporting, with different financing channel that can help you to get you the support that you need in the country to build up the structures, processes, even manpower for the enhanced transparency framework. And also looking into what other benefits can you gain from having this data available, also in different institutions, ministries, and so on. And the third really is to document what you're doing. It's fine to experiment and to do things, but it's really important to have ownership of the data in the country and to have the process defined and have some institution that is responsible for keeping this data, keeping it available, and being able to reproduce it every 2 years. And there can be changes over time and there will be improvements over time, but even for making these improvements, you will need to be able to understand what has been done in the past. I think these are the three things we would see in our interactions with parties and with delegates and experts as key to making the transition. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Dirk. I've another question. There's a couple of questions actually to you about the timing of the submissions. And I see that you've responded to one already, but maybe just it would be of interest for the rest of the participants as well, because I see the same question is coming up again and again about the timing of the submission of the last BUR biennial update report and the first biennial transparency report. So could you talk about that a little bit, please? I think you have already answered in the question and answer box, but yeah, thanks.
I mean, the last BUR is by no later than 2024, but the first BTR must be in 2024. And I think this is a very carefully chosen wording in the discussions. And many also developing countries have already indicated that they will try to have the first BTR earlier so that it can already inform the global stocktake that is scheduled for 2023. So it hangs together with the idea of using the BTRs to inform the global stocktake already, and with many having the ambition to be faster. But latest by end of 2024, we should all be on the same schedule.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe a question to Francesca now. A couple of questions to Francesca in the chat box, in the question and answer box. And one could be, Francesca, in light of the enhanced transparency framework, are there any legal or institutional changes that you foresee that may or could be made in countries to further facilitate transparency in the coming years?
Thank you, Emily. I think a lot has been said also by the country representatives today. I mean, Alanis, Armando, and Daniela. Overall, we can say that for countries to increase transparency and improve access to reliable forest data, as we said, promoting the permanency of the institutions, and in order to retain national expertise, and defining by law what are the mandates, functions, and responsibilities of the different entities that are part of a national forest monitoring system is quite relevant. For example, a decree, and we have several examples really mentioned in the paper, very concrete examples, such as Colombia, which was the very first country we have been working with. So a decree can articulate those roles and responsibilities, whether at national or at subnational levels in relation to an NFMS, but also establish how the information should flow between the subnational to the national level and vice versa. Define what are the platforms that can be used in order to collect, manage, but also disseminate such forest data. Other elements that may be reflected and contained in a decree, for example, or another secondary legislation, secondary instruments, would be to promote the allocation of financial and human resources. I think Armando was very clear in that, and I think that the country will also need to take into consideration what are the proper capabilities in terms of human resources and allocate, if needed, a proper financial resources to that. If needed, it can be also mandated to create by law a service or a unit in order to carry out the various tasks that are needed for that. Another example would be also to develop a data sharing agreement. That's a different kind of instrument aiming to define what type of information, for example, metadata, disaggregated data, etc., and under which conditions and among which parties. So the owner of such data and the potential users can be shared. We have been working on this instrument as well. Overall, and I think Dirk mentioned that on several occasions, efforts should be made in order to build on existing national institutions and national capacities as possible. But in terms of changes, we could, for example, promote integration, right? Integration among forest-related sectors, which could be reflected in a multi-sectoral coordination, articulating forest with other land use sectors, and users such as environmental and agricultural sectors, which would require interoperability. We have in mind here the example of the Simbocute in Costa Rica. In this case, the development of the legal and institutional arrangements then can be accompanied by progresses in setting up the governance structure of an integrated monitoring system, and that's the effort that was made, for example, by Costa Rica. But overall, it's very relevant to include, as possible, all the relevant institutions and stakeholders in those processes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Francesca. I'm just looking in the Q&A here, and I've seen that there is a question to Armando, if we still have Armando on the line. What are the challenges that Mexico has faced in establishing its national forest monitoring system?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that right now the most challenging question that we have is how to secure financial resources to continue implementing our national forestry monitoring system. We have established a set of more than 26,000 plots all over the country, and it's very difficult to get the funds that are needed for implementing the data collection and even a fifth of that amount of plots that we need to do every year. So I would say that this is not right now the most important thing. But in the second, I would say is how to take advantage of that amount of information that we have already available. And for that, we are creating a network of experts, and also inviting experts from different institutions to help us to analyze that data and to squeeze the most that we can have from that information. So for that, I think that will help us to produce better information, and and I would say that that would be the most important thing once that we have this information available. So the need of creating enough technical capabilities is also a great challenge for us, but I'm confident that we have many people in Mexico that can help us to do that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Armando. I think with that, we will wrap up here maybe. We've got only 7 minutes left. So I just want to say a massive thank you to all of our presenters today, Dirk, Francesca, David, Sa, and Daniela and Armando, and also to all of you that participated today. I think we managed to pack a lot into the past half an hour and a half, and hopefully it's been useful to help cement in what the things that you've been learning over the past couple of weeks as part of the online course. Just regarding the questions that are still remaining in the question and answer box, we've managed to answer quite a few of them, but there's still a couple remaining. So just to let you know that we will get back and follow up with those in a follow-up document that we will share on the platform. So fear not if your question has not yet been answered, we will be getting around to it. With that, I'm now going to hand over to Rocio Condor. Rocio is a forestry officer leading the global project CBIT Forest, which is about building global capacity to increase transparency in the forest sector. So thanks for being here with us today, Rocio. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And with this last webinar, we have almost reached the end of this third edition of the MOOC on forest and transparency under the Paris Agreement. And it's today my task to provide some closing remarks. I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar as much as I did. I think we cover a lot of material related to transparency and forest, which has helpfully helped cement the things you cover in this course. Thanks to Dirk from the UNFCCC, walking us through the evolution from MRV to ETF. And this is a process that is constantly moving forward. So enhancing transparency around emissions and commitment to reduce emissions can be a source of optimism in the face of climate crisis. Francesca presented on institutional and legal frameworks to enhance transparency around data being reported, in this case from the forest sector, which we know also from this course is a sector that is significant for its potential to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Protecting and restoring forests in concert with reducing to net zero emissions from fossil fuel combustion is essential to achieving the 1.5 goal of the Paris Agreement, and is significant for intended emissions reduction in the NDCs of many of our countries. It was a privilege to have here today with us as well our colleagues Daniela, Armando, and David from Italy, Mexico, and Liberia, respectively. We got to see how the 3 different countries are monitoring forests, enhancing the transparency, and taking climate action. And hopefully, it has inspired some of your own reflection on your own country's effort in the fight. Let me explain which are the last steps to complete the MOOC, provide you with a brief summary of the course, and explain why we have developed it. Next, please. The last 3 weeks have been very intense, and my team and I are delighted at having seen so many of you participating in the training activities and having interacted with you through forums and webinars. I would like to thank you all for your involvement and your participation. At the same time, I would like to express my gratitude to the team and to the experts who have supported the design of this MOOC and animated the webinars of yesterday and of today. From the UNFCCC, I would like to thank Lisa, Jenny, and Dirk. From FAO to David, Carla, and all colleagues who have connected from the different regions, and the representative from Costa Rica, Mexico, Italy, and Liberia. I also would like to thank the FAO Learning Academy for the support given to make this MOOC possible. The variety of contents covered in the 4 modules have been of interest. I hope forestry officers may have found the topics related to the forest sector most useful, but we hope that the opportunity to examine the potential familiar topics within the context of climate change and the reporting requirements under the Paris Agreement have been novel and of interest. On the other hand, professionals and students' interest in climate change will have had the possibility to explore in more details aspects of the Paris Agreement that are related to the forest sector. From our side, we have greatly appreciated the rich variety of experience, languages, and nationalities of you, the people that have been attending this online course, and your involvement in the learning activities. With the closure model of the MOOC, the remaining activities to complete are available. Take the final test to get the digital badge certification and complete the survey. At the end, a certificate of attendance will be provided electronically. Next one. In the next few days, we will be analyzing in more detail the reports of this online training to understand the levels and modalities of participation. However, let me share with you information on the course coverage available in this map. Next one. We have seen that 1,634 participants from 148 countries registered to the MOOC from all over the world. 36% women participating. And interactive lessons have been average consulted by over 250 participants. Forums have been used to share knowledge and experience among countries. Your involvement and participation show that our aim to reach as large an audience as possible with our efforts in providing it in 3 languages may be considered achieved. And our aim was also to enhance awareness and information of how important is it that countries contribute to global action against climate change and to highlight how much this action involves the forest sector. This MOOC was carried out within the CBIT Forest Global Project, aiming to increase institutional and technical capacities and to boost knowledge sharing and awareness raising about the ETF, particularly in the forest sector. Next one. I invite you to consult and share with your networks our global knowledge product available that are open to everybody. The FRA reporting and dissemination platform are available in 6 languages. The tool developed to facilitate the assessment of gaps and needs in countries' national forest monitoring system. The outreach and communication material, as well as the case studies on transparency that have been developed. Check and share the compilation we have prepared for you. And I think more importantly, share with your colleagues the e-learning material we have developed and is soon available in 6 UN languages. We have developed 3 editions of this massive open online course in English, Spanish, and French. And hopefully by the end of the year, we will have all this information open and available for everybody. Next one. We hope you have appreciated this course and that you will be able to apply and transfer the knowledge acquired to your activities in your countries so that to sustain the global community to reach the ambitious objectives of the Paris Agreement. The key message we wanted to communicate has reached all of you. The MOOC highlights that a well-established national forest monitoring system is key to providing robust and consistent forest-related data to assess and report forest-related emissions and removals, and for tracking progress toward achieving a country's national determined contribution. Next one. Stay tuned and follow us so you can get engaged in the upcoming activities. On 17 November, we will have a global webinar where we will be launching a series of free and open national forest inventory models, where also Liberia and Guatemala will be sharing their experience. Do not miss it, and check our webpage for more news. Wish you a good rest of your day. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Rocio, and thanks everyone. I think we can close here. It was really great to have everyone on board today, and have a good evening or afternoon. Goodbye.